Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Back to Suicide. This is one of your hosts, Dr. Diane Kaufman, though I prefer to be called Diana for my creative self. I am a poet, artist, internationally award-winning lyricist, retired child psychiatrist, and the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. My co-host from South Africa is Kino Isaac, and Kino is a DJ, music entrepreneur, music producer, and an advocate for the mental health of independent artists. And we're delighted to welcome to Talking Back to Suicide, Megan Caughey, who's coming to us from Oregon. Megan has a Master of Fine Arts degree, is author of the award-winning memoir, Mud Flower: Surviving Schizophrenia and Suicide Through Art, giving voice to her journey as a person living with serious mental illness, surviving extreme treatments who both family and the health system had given up upon, defying all expectations and common beliefs of what was possible. In Mudflower, Megan shares eloquently on how the life force can either be nurtured by elements in our environment, such as nature, beauty, and art, or destroyed by dehumanization and coercion. Megan is an exhibited artist, cellist, poet, a mental health activist, and a sought-after keynote speaker. She's also a certified peer wellness and support specialist and was senior director of peer and wellness services at Cascadia Behavioral Health Care in Portland, Oregon. She's an assistant professor of psychiatry at Oregon Health and Science University, where she uses art to train medical students and psychiatrists. She says, quote, "To live, art is essential. Imbibing the life force is essential for making art. I survive because I am able to draw and paint the edge where I find myself." Her favorite quote is from the German artist Gerhard Richter, who said, "Art is the highest form of hope." Welcome, Megan. We're so honored to have you with us on Talking Back to Suicide today.
Thank you, Diana. I'm really pleased to be here. And hi, Kino.
Hi.
So, Megan, I listened to your memoir on Audible. It's so deep, authentic, heartfelt, harrowing, and inspiring, all at the same time, and so beautifully written. Could you, if you like, explain how you came to write the memoir and what you hoped to impart to the reader, listener?
Oh, sure. Thank you for taking the time to listen to it. Yeah, the first version of that memoir was written, many years ago before I was even fully in recovery, and I wrote it in a form that was first person present tense the whole way. And I took it to a publisher, and they said, "Oh, it's not written strongly enough." So I spent 10 or 15 years working on my writing. And I find that when I teach, I tell a lot of stories, and people have let me know that sometimes those stories can be helpful to them. And writing is a form of expression that I enjoy. So it just seemed natural to write it. But excuse me, I had to really work on my writing skills. So it didn't just pop out the first thing and that was it. It went from over the years to get it to be where it needed to be. And I'm actually working on a follow-up manuscript book for it right now called Art at the Edge.
And tell us about the title, Mud Flower. What does that mean? And what's the symbolism and also the reality and nature of that?
Sure. So I was going through a period of time where I was trying to. It was kind of like playing roulette or something. I was testing my, did I really want to live? And often I would do something to hurt myself and call my psychiatrist and say, I've done this. And they would send the ambulance and the police out, the sheriff out, and they would take me to the hospital and, put me back on my feet. But I had done that a number of times and it just didn't quite feel right to me. I mean, I was very ambivalent. And I think ambivalence is a very common um, uh, attribute of when sometimes some people are feeling suicidal. So it was in the middle of the night. I'm a painter. I couldn't sleep. I got up and I walked into my studio. Now, when I was a teenager, I had started meditating and practicing Buddhism kind of off and on. But I went into my studio. It's like 3 a.m, and here's this contemporary magazine on Buddhism open on a chair. I just kind of half-heartedly picked it up and looked at it. And there was an article on lotuses. Now, a lot of you know that a lotus is a very sacred flower, especially in Asia. And so I started reading about lotuses. I didn't know anything about them. But it said that a lotus has to have its roots in the mud in order to become such a beautiful flower. And that was news to me. And then it said also that if you take 40 lotuses and hook them up to some kind of electrical apparatus, that those 40 lotuses have enough life force in them to illuminate a light bulb. This was before halogen bulbs. They could illuminate a light bulb just because they have the life force. And this was news to me. Something just kind of spoke to me. And I thought, okay, Megan, you have all this mud in your life. You have years of mud. Mud. Maybe you can become a beautiful flower like a lotus because you're just so full of mud. So in the middle of the night, I started to paint some lotuses with my oil paint. And I would pay special attention to the mud. And if you see the cover of Mudflower, that's one of my paintings. So I was painting lotus after lotus. Some of them looked like flowers, some of them didn't. But the more I painted the lotuses, the more I got in touch with the strength of my mud. I had this mud and I thought, I can use this to do something good with my life. My life can have meaning and value because of the mud. That was just like such a wild thought for me. And yet it's true. And so the more I painted the lotuses, the stronger my life force grew. And eventually I started showing some in the gallery, and it was a message and an idea that resonated with me and with a lot of other people that I talked to. So I have a very special place in my heart for lotuses, a lot of respect for that flower. And now when I do a lot of teaching, I will use the metaphor of the lotus because, and people will draw lotus drawings. And with a lotus drawing, people will draw their mud, and then above the line for the horizon, they'll draw the flower. And that's meaningful to a lot of people because we all have mud, don't we? I mean, you're a psychologist, don't we have mud? Do we have mud?
Yep.
And I was at your recent workshop at Oregon Health and Sciences University and participated in the group as we all drew our lotus and the mud, importantly. I guess in a way there would not be the lotus flower without the mud.
Right.
Now, could you say something about, Megan, schizophrenia and also schizoaffective disorder, and how did symptoms start to show up in your life, and what were they, and what were the consequences of those?
Sure. So when I was 19, I was a freshman in college in Colorado State University. And I was studying art. And I did try some mescaline at one point. But what happened is I started hearing voices, like in the middle of a class, an art history class. And I didn't know what it was. And I walked across the campus to get, I was very disturbed by these voices. They were saying bad things to me that were upsetting, but I didn't know what it was. And I didn't really know that it was just my brain doing that. It was like, I just didn't understand. So I ended up being taken to the school's health center and spent a few days there. And they gave me medication. I guess they figured out that I had some kind of psychotic disorder. And then they took me to see the psychiatrist. And I must tell you, I like to talk about the psychiatrist because it was kind of pokes fun. I'm sorry, Diana, if I'm poking fun at a psychiatrist, but this was a guy sitting across a big desk. I went into his office and we looked at each other, kind of disapproving of each other. And I just have to tell you, he had nose hair and ear hair. And I was so struck by it. Now, how could someone with that much nose hair and ear hair know anything? But after a few minutes, he pointed his finger at me and he said, "You have schizophrenia." I thought, what? I don't know what schizophrenia is. I mean, it's like, I've heard of it, but it sounded like very bad news. I thought, he can't possibly know anything he's talking about with that much nose hair. But then I thought, well, he does know something. And it was like being condemned. And I was 19 then, and then over the next 20 years, I was going in and out of hospitals. I was usually diagnosed with schizophrenia, but I didn't believe I had it. That when you don't believe you have a diagnosed mental illness like schizophrenia is anosognosia. So I had very strong anosognosia. I did not want to take medication. I would become symptomatic, be hospitalized, and given medication, and then get better, and then come out. It would cycle in and out and in and out. I would stop taking it. I hated the side effects. And it was just the side effects that made me not want to take it.
And you had received electroconvulsive shock therapy and diabetic-like induced coma as interventions too?
Well, yeah, let me tell you about that, because after Colorado, I ended up being hospitalized in a regular psych hospital for the first time. I was hospitalized for 6 months, and that was in Galveston, Texas, on Galveston Island. And it was awful. There was this, the hospital was called Graves, of all things, like a grave. And first I was given electroconvulsive therapy. And at that time, it was different than it's done now. There was not the same anesthesia. So I would be tied down. My whole body would be tied down. Then I would have some anesthesia, and I would wake up in a different room, not knowing if I was alive or dead. So they did that for weeks, and I wasn't getting better. So then they started something called insulin coma therapy. Now, in most places, insulin coma therapy had been stopped in the 40s and 50s, 1940s, 1950s, because what they do is they give you a large dose of insulin and then you go into a coma, like a diabetic coma, but it's not. It's and they leave you there for like a half hour or so. And then they give you sugar, and I would have to drink this big glass of sugar, sugar infused orange juice. It was awful. But the reason they stopped it in the 40s and 50s is because so many people would be put into that coma and then they would not be able to be resuscitated from it. So they would just spend the rest of their life in a coma. And so people stopped doing that. But in Texas, on Galveston Island, they were doing it in the 1970s. And so what they would do with me is one day they would do the electroconvulsive therapy, the ECT, and the next day they would do insulin coma. And they would go in and off and off, from one to the other. And the thing that I noticed the most is I lost my memory of anything. My cognition just went flat. And I couldn't remember the people that I had known when I was in college in Colorado. I couldn't remember much of anything. And so when I was finally just flat and kind of a shell, they said, "Oh, you're better." I wasn't better. I was depleted. But then they let me go home because there was nothing left to do. And for many years, I went in and out of hospitals, but I have had ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, at other times where it was done much more humanely. It was actually more helpful, if I can say. But the insulin coma therapy, I'm just glad that I made it out alive.
As part of, go on.
You asked about insulin. You asked about suicide, schizoaffective disorder. So when I was in my 40s, they changed my diagnosis to schizoaffective disorder, which is a psychotic type of disorder, but it also includes affective or emotional feelings involved. So I have schizoaffective disorder type 2, which means it's hypomania, not hypermania. So I don't get totally off the wall manic, but I will miss sleep and maybe stay up painting a long time. I have to be really careful about my sleeps and how I take care of myself. But that is that. And now actually I have an additional diagnosis of PTSD from the treatments that I've had.
I remember from your memoir an experience that you had. It was night and freezing cold out, and I know you were barefoot and ecstatic about nature and the stars. Was that part of having a psychotic slash hypomanic experience? Because I think some friends had seen you and they helped you to go to the health center.
So let me just underscore that nature has helped me throughout my life. I've taken refuge in nature, the natural world, animals and plants and stars and wind and oceans, and I go to nature as a respite, and it's a very important part of my life. So I had been hearing voices and been really unhappy and terrified.
There were visions too that you were having?
Yes, I would see people's faces, like they were insects, like big insects. It was a terrible sight. And I would look at my own face and see a monster. So I was in Colorado. It was my first year in Colorado, and in the fall, I had been just really unhappy and struggling. And the first snow came, so I went outside. I didn't bother to put on a coat or shoes, but I went outside and I just looked up at the snowflakes coming down, and they were so beautiful and so peaceful. And I loved them, and they just soothed me, and I felt happy. And then some people that I knew, they saw me, they knew I'd been struggling. They saw me standing there with no coat, no shoes in the snow, and they were worried about me. I didn't want to go with them, but they wanted me to go with them, and they took me to the student health center. And that's when I went to the student health center for the very first time, where they kept me for about 3 days before I saw the psychiatrist. So, but in Mudflower, there are a lot of times in writing in Mudflower where I tell about going out in nature and how that soothes me. It is like a refuge. I especially like to go to this one place called the Goose Refuge, where I would get out on this little raft and with my sleeping bag, and I would sleep all night on this raft floating around the Goose Refuge, looking up at the stars and sometimes having voices. But when you're surrounded by beauty, when I was surrounded by beauty, I didn't feel as affected by the voices. So that was my way of treating myself.
Megan, you also describe in Mudflower, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, 4 years of experience at cathexis, which had to do with not being on medication, that they, part of their protocol was not being on medication, and like a reparenting idea that schizophrenia was related to bad parenting,
Right.
especially related to the mother, it seems, which I want your feedback on this, which has been debunked, that schizophrenia is not related to a refrigerator mother or
Right.
anything to do with parenting, that it is a physiological, physical brain illness, which can be influenced by life circumstances, but it has nothing to do with bad parenting. And yet their treatment modality was related to that. And there was what, regression to infancy. Could you say something about that?
Sure. I had tried to go to graduate school to study art therapy, and my psychosis got so bad, and they ended up hospitalizing me. This was in Vermont. And then I was told that I would need to go into residential treatment care. So I went back to Texas. I hated to go back to Texas, but I had to go back. And I really didn't want to go any place where I would have to take medication. So I learned about a place called the Cathexis Institute out in California, Oakland, California, where they didn't use medication because they thought, like you said, that psychosis, schizophrenia was caused by faulty parenting, especially having to do with the nursing or problems with feeding the child. And so I was given the diagnosis of schizophrenia, excuse me. And a lot of people there were about 25 students. We were called students, not patients. And people would form parenting contracts with the therapists there. And the therapists, one therapist was a guy who was in advertising. One therapist was an 18-year-old high school senior. One therapist was there were a couple that were counselors at elementary school, but it was a very unusual place. And one of the things that was done is people would be encouraged to regress to childhood and be given, the therapist would hold us in their laps and give us baby bottles with a nipple of warm milk. That was part of the treatment. It was a very physical place. And I do believe that physicality can be good in treatment, but this was just wonky. It was really bizarre. And one of the treatments would be like to make a parenting contract and say for 4 days be regressed the whole time, be in diapers, adult in diapers. You use the diapers get changed, get bathed, you get treated just like a baby, and yet you're an adult. But it was strangely easy to get into that mindset of being regressed. I mean, at first it was like, can I do this? Can I, have my diaper changed? Oh gosh, that's awful. But it was because I was able to slip into that. Another thing they did was called Asclepian games, where there would be 15 or so people in a room, and pillows would be covering the windows so no sound could get out. And the only rule of the Asclepian game is that you had to stay in your chair, and you would say the most awful things that you could think to say to someone to upset them, to help and cause them to decompensate. So people would say horrible things to each other, and they would know they were doing really good if the other person was crying and totally upset. So I think the first or second time I went to that game, I was trying to avoid being the target of the animosity, but I didn't survive. They turned it on me, and they were saying awful things to me, and all I could think of was stay in my chair. But I was screaming and crying, and they took me out. They didn't have me doing it again. But they also used corporal punishment. If someone there were lots of rules. If someone broke a rule, they could be hit with a stick, and sometimes people would be have to stand in the corner of the room and have their hands held up behind them so they're up on their toes. It was a punishment, and it was painful. And I remember one time someone was in the corner for like 23 hours, and people would stay all night with them, supervising them. The only time they would get out of the corner would be to go to the bathroom on their heavy guards. But it was bizarre.
And this is so horrifying. It's institutional abuse, and those people should have been in jail.
Well, I wanted to stay there because
you wanted to get well. Your motivation.
Because they said they could do it without medication, and I was motivated to do it because I didn't want to take medication. And there were stories of people that had done this that had gotten well, that had schizophrenia. But I finally had to leave because I had a roommate. I had a roommate who was working with a therapist, and she would go to his house all night, and another therapist would go. And I didn't know what they were doing there. Then one day after she had been at his house, she was coming out of the bathroom, out of the shower, and I looked at her legs. Her legs were revealed, and these massive bruises like I had never seen on anyone. I said, "Linda, what happened to you?" And she said, "Oh, I was working on sadism and masochism with my dad. Her father was a therapist. She had a parenting contract with him, and he had beaten her, trying to solve her masochism problems." And I saw that, and I just thought, I can't be here.
I have to get out of here. It also sounds like a cult. What do you think it was, a cult in some way?
Well, we got programmed to respond if people said that, because it was in some ways like a cult, but no one wanted to say it was like a cult. But it was, there was a frame of reference that everyone in treatment had to buy into. And they would train people from all over the world in this frame of reference. But no one wanted to say, "Oh, this is a cult," that we're not thinking for ourselves. But if we rejected any of the thoughts, any of the ideas, we would be corporally punished. So I think it's like a cult, and some people thought that, but there was a lot of pushback because cults were not, too popular, so we didn't want to admit that. But yeah, I think you're right. The woman who started it was named Jackie Lee Schiff, and she ended up going to England and finally India, because in India, she could do more severe punishments of people without there being pushback from the authorities.
So terrible. And I'm thinking that a person who is having mental challenges, mental illness, so vulnerable, right? How to bad actors, right? What suggestion do you give to perhaps people listening right now? How can you know that the intervention treatment that you're receiving is appropriate, right? It is something that is evidence-based care, right? Or is a respectful place and not dangerous where you're going to be abused.
Well, I think you've got to do a lot of homework and also communicate with people that know what's going on. The Cathexis Institute, the psychiatrist who was over it ended up getting in trouble with the law because of some of his physical things he did with the patients.
Absolutely. And lose a medical license too. Yeah.
It's no longer going on. But I think a lot of people that have severe psychotic disorders are scared of treatment and want to know it's okay. I think you just have to do a lot of homework and talk to people with lived experience who have come out of treatment programs. Sometimes there are organizations that you can connect with, like peer organizations and things like that. But it's, I know there's still problems, but it is better now than it used to be.
So in your story of your life so far, right, I'm thinking that you've come so far, right? Or here you are, an assistant professor, right, at OHSU, teaching medical residents and psychiatrists, and you were senior director of a peer wellness program. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to achieve those things and what happened with the schizoaffective type 2 disorder.
Okay, well, when I was in a day treatment program. I would go 5 days a week to this treatment program for people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And I was sitting in the waiting room one day. I picked up this newsletter. I was looking for something to read, And it was a medical newsletter. And it said on the last page, it talked about medications that were in phase 3 trials. And one of the side effects that I hated so much from the antipsychotic medications was the propensity for weight gain. I mean, I would look at a medication and I would gain weight, and I was really unhappy with that.
And
And
not a
so,
little bit of weight, right? It can be
oh,
significant gain.
you know, 90 pounds or so, huge. And that was, I had such a hard time accepting myself like that. So I read about this medication that was in phase 3 trials where they said it did not cause weight gain. And I just got this hit like, oh, this will help me. So I pursued it. And so I was in Corvallis, Oregon at that time. The closest, I started calling the drug company saying, how can I get into a clinical trial? And they said, well, the closest one is in Los Angeles, where you would know you were getting the phase 3 drug. And I ended up getting into that clinical trial. I was in the clinical trial for 2 years. During that time, I lost 70 or 80 pounds, and my symptoms stopped. I stopped having voices. I stopped seeing things, but I could paint. I could still paint, but I didn't see insects on people's faces and stuff. And it was amazing. And I remember one time during this clinical trial, I was out in my yard planting a bamboo plant. And I had this really weird feeling like, what's this feeling that I'm having? I don't recognize this. But it was pleasure. I was feeling pleasure. I had had so much anhedonia or lack of pleasure for so many years that when I started feeling good, I didn't know what it was. It was bizarre. And I thought, my life is changing. So when the drug got approved by the FDA, I actually started doing some consulting and working for the drug company. And people talk about big pharma, and big pharma is like a really bad thing for most people. But I would go to New Jersey and visit the lab where the drug had been made and talk to the scientists that had spent 20 years working on this. And so I have a different perspective because I know people as people, not big pharma. But they were thrilled with me because I did so well in this clinical trial. It was really a good medication for me. Now, unfortunately, 15 or 20 years later, I developed a very severe illness called neuroleptic malignant syndrome, and I had to stop taking the medication. But I had been able to get free of the psychosis part of my life, or see beyond that, and that set me free. So suddenly, I was going around the country giving talks for the drug company, talking about my experience. And I started thinking, I want to work. I want to have a life. I was 50 years old then. I was 50 years old when my professional life began. And no one had thought it would be possible. People had written me off, including my family, unfortunately, but my dreams came alive, and I wanted to advocate for people who had been in a position similar to mine, where they were told there was no answer and to just give up on life. So I started developing peer training for people who had lived experience of mental health issues, got trained to use their experiences as a connection for relationships with people who are struggling. And my whole life just opened up, Diana. It was like um, no one saw it coming, and my life is still just um, amazing me.
You're a blossoming lotus.
I am. I have a beautiful flower, and I love my flower, and I love sharing my flower. That's partly why I write the books like Mudflower and Art from the Edge, and I do these trainings and things. It's this is what I'm here to do.
The conclusion of the memoir talks about being in the fire. Could you talk about that? What that means? What that meant in your life, and what it might mean for all of our lives?
Sure. Well, there's a saying that you go through the fire and you come out the other side. And always the thing is that you might be in the fire, but you'll come out the other side. And at the end of the flower, I'm making the commitment to help a friend of mine who's struggling with suicidality. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, honestly. But I know that I've got to make the commitment to be with her in the fire. She's, quote, in the fire because she's struggling with not wanting to live. And it occurred to me that I didn't know that I would come out the other side, but I was okay just to be in the middle of the fire. Maybe that's where I'm meant to be, is where in the middle of the fire. But there's a beauty to that. There's a way to be in the middle of the fire and have value and beauty to one's life, and to just do what needs to be done, the purpose of our life. So I still don't know if I'll come out totally on the other side of the fire, but I'm glad to be right where I am. And I still have hard days sometimes. Last weekend was really hard with some of the things going on in our country, some of the violence and hurt that happens to people. But I will still push forward and keep making art. For me, making art is a way to deal with the pain and the suffering, and by helping promote people, whether they're psychiatrists or patients or whatever, to make art. That's the role of my life now. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm finding ways to use art to help people flourish and grow and be well.
Join in.
I was just thinking, and this is not a question, this is more a statement. Like back in the day, especially if you watch these old Western movies, if your child was unwell, even if it was flu, the Satan is in you. We need to take the devil out of you. That's just how it was. So the explanation about the father hitting, the girl, it's not something that's, new, you know, it's been happening. I think it still happens in 2026 because, and this relates or links back to cults. There's certain cults that don't believe in medical research or medicine or, psychology, none of it. So there's something wrong with you, especially what you have gone through, Megan. The devil is in you and they want to literally hit it out of their kids. It's a reality. It's happening all over. So, yeah, my conclusion to that is that just their belief system, and how they have been brainwashed. I mean, if they had to listen to you right now, it would be like, no, this is rubbish. She's lying. But yeah, more a statement and something to think about, think about another message to actually put out there. So, Megan, I want to take what you've explained to us about your life, and now I want to link it to 2026 because the Gen Z may be listening to this right now who's currently struggling with what you have gone through and is like, look at her, she makes it sound so easy because we live in an area where kids are continuously, judged. We laughed at. If I'm sitting in a classroom and I start hearing voices, people don't really come to help you. They're laughing at you first. They're judging you first. And that's leading, kids now to want to take, their own life. They're not as strong as you are. They're not even as strong as I am, like being a millennial. It ended at millennials, having that inner strength to say, there's a purpose with my life. I can do something with my life, no matter what I'm going through at the moment. But when it comes to a Gen Z and the younger the kids actually get, the generations to come, it's not easy. It's not easy. They can't handle. So, with your memoir, your story, what would be your message to them?
Well, your point is very well taken, because the younger folks are really struggling, and especially with what's going on in our society. It's very discouraging and concerning, and there's so much going on in our society that speaks of violence, and I won't go into the details, but I mean, it's all around us, and it's being propagated by the establishment. So the main thing I would say for someone in Gen Z is look for ways to connect with people that you see their vision, that they have a good vision. If you can connect and have a way to explore your own vision for your own life. And I suggest using art or music or dance or poetry or whatever to do that, and sharing that with people. Look for people that you admire and connect with them. I think connection is one of the most key things that a person who's struggling can do. And I think it's very common sometimes for people to withdraw when they're struggling and become very solitary. I certainly did that. But now I really value connection. And sometimes you're scared. We're scared. I can be scared to connect. But just go ahead and do it. Or maybe, if you can't connect with a human being, connect with an animal. I happen to have with me right now. Can you see this? I connect with my animal. This is metta. Metta means loving kindness in Buddhism. But
I agree. I agree with what you're saying. 100%. Because you also mentioned, and I actually had that written down. Before you mentioned that your relationship with your family, you mentioned that your family, they wrote you off, and that's still a reality in 2025. So we're dealing with, a generation, and not only Gen Zs, but we're living in a time, that's phrased better. We're living in a time where people are just getting written off by their family, by their friends. They're seen as crazy, and it's hard, so hard to find that connection. Once your own family decides to just, get rid of you, difficult. But how did that make you when your family said, we want nothing to do with you?
it took years of healing. It took years before I would connect back with my family. And I actually lost my brother to suicide along the way. It took many years for the healing to happen between myself and my mother. And then she didn't think I would ever get better. So she made like a trust that because I was on disability and SSI, and no one expected me to be able to have a job. And then when I was in my 50s, I started working and doing innovative work that was suddenly respected by people. And I had all these things opening up. And she was in Texas, and I went to visit her. And I was taking a different medication and I had gained weight. And I was really ashamed of myself. I went to see her and thinking, oh, she's going to see I've gained weight. And she saw me, and her words were, I am so proud of you. I was amazed. I never thought I would hear my mother say that she was proud of me. So that was like a great thing that none of us saw coming. But it can happen. It can happen.
Time heals. I just covered one more statement, or really a question. I don't know how you will take this. If you open-minded, you'll take it well. Your journey, your life is special in a good way. It's more going down the road of spiritual. You know, you were meant to go through what you went through. You were meant to have what you had, what you still may have, because you were meant to change the world. So, to anyone listening who has some sort of mental disorder, mental disease, who feels that the awkward one in society, something is wrong with me, look deep inside what is your purpose right now, because you are going to be someone that changes thousands, millions of lives one day. That's my feeling.
And Megan, I have a question going back to the theme of connection. I'm remembering in the memoir, you talked about Buddhism and a principle of nonviolence and to do no harm. Could you say something about that? Because that's an inner connection, right?
Yes.
To inner values and principles to live by.
Yes. I discovered Buddhism when I was in high school and started practicing. But at that time, in the 70s, in Texas, there were not too many Buddhists. So it was years later that I actually got connected with other people practicing Buddhism. But there was, and there is a belief that is not skillful to act violently. And well, the first thing that when I studied Buddhism at first, and found that at first, one of the first things it says is life is suffering. It's the nature of life to be having happiness. And I thought, that's true. No one else had said that to me, but I thought they knew what they're talking about, because life is suffering. And the feeling of wanting to end one's life, I think usually co-occurs with suffering. So all through my life, at times I've suffered, and even in recent years, there are times when I feel like things are very hard and suffering, and I just have to decide. I have to ask myself, what do I want the message of my life to be? And over, I have to answer that. And I don't want the message of my life to be violence and death or killing, or I want the message of my life to be creating something, loving. That's the highest thing. So
The highest frequency.
yes.
It's almost like being in the fire of the suffering and something being burnt away, but we're still alive, and the life force becomes the essence or pureness of the life force can be revealed. I really loved that description of when you were talking about that you were vowing not to be violent, right? To be loving and to have loving kindness and compassion to yourself as well as to others, because that, I think that can be a core help for someone who wants to end their life, to hold on to their life, not to enact violence to themselves.
Well, when I was like 48, I was with I'd been practicing Buddhism with a group and with a teacher, and decided to do what's called taking the vows or taking jukai. And you study and you spend months getting ready to do this. Is a big thing. And one of the vows that you take is, I will not act violent. I will not act out violence. And when you take jukai, it's a lay ordination. So I'm not ordained like a priest or nun, but I have a lay ordination, and I have 2 Buddhist names. Most people get 1 Buddhist name, but my teacher gave me 2. One, the one I usually use is Jisho, which means compassion for all living beings. And my second Buddhist name is Ahimsa, which means non-harming. And that was very important because the teacher gives you names that you will grow into with the meaning of your life. So I'm dedicating my life to loving and helping people that I can help. And then also I'm committed to non-harming, which for me comes out as love.
Someone listening wants to have peer support by a certified peer wellness specialist. How can they secure that?
Well, you have to go through an organization that hires peer providers. Now, in Oregon, the program that I designed is peer wellness specialist, because I was really keen on integrating behavioral health with primary care. And so that's peer wellness specialist. The peer support specialist is more narrow. It's just mental health, but it's getting broader. But anyway, you go to your organization's care providers, mental health systems, and a lot of places have programs where they hire people.
What can you say, Megan, about sustaining hope in the midst of having mental health crises or becoming suicidal? How have you been able to nurture your hope?
Well, to be honest with you, there are times when I really feel fairly out of hope. I don't have hope all the time, but I have commitment to life, commitment to that I don't want my life to just be like this, the things that are bringing our society down, like violence. I mean, we have so much violence going on in our culture now, and only through love and beauty and caring, that be addressed. So kind of sometimes I just feel like I'm doing just the best I can. And it's a little shaky, quite honestly, but it gets better. Sometimes I reach out to people, and sometimes I feel very alone, and that's unfortunate. But the purpose of my life is to find ways to make the lotus blossom, and sometimes I can do that, and sometimes it's pretty rocky, but then it gets better. And I'm old enough now that I've seen it cycle in and out of hard and better and hard and better. And, sometimes I will just reach out to people I know and just say, listen, I'm having a hard day today. Can you talk to me?
I feel that that lotus is blossoming in the conversation that we're all having today, too. And Megan, how can people purchase your, and I want to say, many award-winning memoir, right? How can they find the book, and how can they learn more about you?
The
Is there a
book is
website or, yeah.
There is a website for the book. It's www.mudflowerbook.com. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's hardback, paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. And hopefully I'll get this next one written in the next 4 or 5 months. I do have a website for my art, and that is myname.com, megancahe.com. And I have a lot of my paintings and drawings on that website, and so people can see really. I mean, oftentimes when I'm teaching, I will use slides of my work, my art, because that actually describes a lot of things I'm trying to say in words today, but I can say better through my art.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, for being on Talking Back to Suicide. And you've made, I'm going to say you made, and may we all make, very good use of the moment, right? So that all of our lotus flowers can bloom and blossom, right? And that fragrance is going to be felt by so many people, right? Nurturing, loving, inspiring. Thank you, Megan. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you, Kian.
Bye.